Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel, and welcome back to the Magnus Carlsen Invitational Tournament in 2021. We're back into the match game between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi. Incredible things happened, of course. Meanwhile, yesterday Jan Nepomniachtchi won the first day. In the second day, Jan Nepomniachtchi took the lead, so it means now after these two games, Magnus Carlsen needs now 2 wins in order to make it to the additional games. This is really already sort of a mission impossible, but you never know when Magnus Carlsen is playing. Let's skip now to the game 3. It was the first match point for Jan Nepomniachtchi. If he makes a draw, the world champion is out, so the world champion is really hanging here. So let's check out now the game here. Nepo opens with the move e4, c5 the Sicilian, knight to f3, e6 the Polson or the French Sicilian. He's on the board, of course, with ideas to get the d5 pawn breakthrough. In the game d4, c takes d4, knight to d4, and now queen to b6. And we have the so-called Quinus variation. It's very unpopular line, of course, to getting the queen so early into the game. The idea is, of course, to prevent immediately this idea bishop to e3. Your pawn on b2 could be hanging, so that's why Nepo goes knight to c3 and now a6. Like in the Najdorf, like in the Schevening Najdorf Sicilians, we're playing a6, preventing some knight to b5 moves. In the game, we have a3 and now queen to c7. Really wild opening choice by Magnus Carlsen. He played now with the queen in the opening twice, but of course he has to risk something. He has to make something out of it. He has to play some kind of a dynamic position. He's provoking here a little bit Jan Nepomniachtchi to get this game into dynamics. Here after the queen move queen to c7, the normal idea is of course to move g3, because not that this move is only preparing bishop to g2, it's also preparing bishop to f4. So attacking the queen immediately. So then if you cover maybe with bishop to d6, in some occasions after potential bishop to f4, if you could just imagine the position, there are maybe some tactics with knight to b5, and then you take out the bishop because the queen could be also attacking the d6. So there are these common tactics in these types of lines, so that's why Magnus has to be also careful when it comes to covering with the move bishop to d6. So knight to f6 played by Magnus. We have bishop to g2, knight to c6 normal development, and now Carlsen played by Nepo. And here comes already a wild move by the world champion. Of course, normal ideas would be bishop to e7, Carlsen then slowly building up here with the d5, d6 and similar ideas. Magnus goes now all in because he has to win this game. He plays h5, and it's not such a bad move. It's not that this move is giving Nepo such a huge advantage. I think it's an annoying move because we're playing immediately h4. We're threatening at least this idea. Then we're trying maybe to get a queen and rook battery somehow, not immediately, but as a long-term plan, maybe get a queen and rook battery on the h file and try even checkmate. Because the main issue of whites when it comes to the defensive setup here on the king side is that the knight is not anymore here on f3. So the f3 knight would be also protecting the h4 square, but also the h2 square. So there are really great opportunities now for both sides. But as I said, Magnus had to go now into a wild game because here after move knight to c6, we have b takes c6, and now Magnus has really the opportunity to push the pawn on d5, getting at least the pawn central control. Here, Nepo goes bishop to f4. The idea is clear. What he wants to do is now to provoke some weaknesses when it comes to pawn structures. Of course, Magnus would threaten here d5, c takes d5, and then maybe e5. When Magnus connects maybe the d5 pawn and e5 pawn, then he could have a very annoying center to battle against. So that's why bishop to f4 provokes basically this move e5. And now after bishop to g5, Nepomniachtchi found great ways how to first stop here black's progress with the move h4, and also he's stopping a potential d5 move because he could simply take out bishop to f6, and then he has a powerful control of the d5 square. So what Magnus can do is maybe play a move like d6, but this d6 move, if you want to develop, of course, is blocking out your dark square bishop and also your d6 could be long-term weakness, because white could build simply a battery, queen to d2, rook to d1, and similarly. So there are really problems now for Magnus to develop, because he played this very aggressive line. So that's why he tried bishop to c5. At least we're developing the piece somewhere in the game. Queen to f3, not the best of moves. b4, kicking away the bishop immediately, then after a potential bishop to d4, queen to d3, knight to e2, and then maybe even with first of course getting the rook maybe on the d file, and then with c3 kicking away the bishop, then again trying this attacks on the d file. So queen to f3 gives now Magnus the opportunity to lock the center. d6, the bishop on the c5 is protected, the bishop is out. What's the most important thing? It's of course much better to have the bishop on c5 than on e7. Here in the game h3, Nepo prevents this pinning, this idea bishop to g4, then the queen gets again to d3, and the queen wouldn't be powerful there. So h3 so far a nice prophylactic idea by Nepo. So knight to d7, Magnus sent here, I think that this bishop could endanger it, and if you get at least the knight on c5, if you take out the bishop, then this knight comes very active into the game. Then we could try here f6 and then kick away further the bishop with g5, but it's still risky. You see the king is in the center. There are opportunities for white, of course, to attack the castle king. We have rook to d1, a normal idea here by Nepo, and now Magnus plays a great move, knight to f8. He found great ways how to activate this knight, knight to e6, knight to d4, or knight to f4 if you advance, for instance, the pawn. So these are, as we said, really the main weaknesses in white's position. The d4 is a very weak square. Here knight to a4, again not the best of moves. Bishop to e3 would be slightly better, because you have to compete with this annoying bishop. Now after bishop to e3, queen to e3, then maybe knight to e6 or a5 by the world champion, and still a potential knight to e6, then knight to e2, and we could play c3 and never ever allow this knight to come on d4. So it was maybe a better idea. He tried knight to f4. We have knight to e6, bishop to e3 comes a little bit too late because Magnus takes, queen to e3, and now comes h4. Magnus found really great ways how to attack now the position. Something went wrong for Nepo. He played many maneuvers, he played many piece moves. Magnus is now attacking the position, although this d6 pawn is still a weakness. But actually, if white goes directly now against the d6, then I think even king to e7 would be a nice possibility. Stay a little bit there with the king in the center. We still can build maybe with f6 a nice and compact setup here around our king, so it's possible. So now the position is not so endangered anymore for black. In the game, knight to b6, Nepo attacks the rook, but rook to b8, and if you take out here the bishop, then rook to c8. This wasn't played in the game, but I think in these types of positions the knight is perfectly fine. What we can notice in this structure here is that the bishop, the light bishop, is blocked out by its own pawn. So you don't want to have, of course, your bishop like this. You would love to have it maybe somewhere here on this diagonal, but Magnus already attacked the position with h4, and now there are maybe realistic opportunities here with the knight outpost on d4. Again, if we kicked away, we'll find, I think, always good ways how to activate this knight. There are many good squares for the knight. On the other hand, I think this bishop of whites is simply not so good. So you don't trade off your good knight here for a bad bishop, I think. So this knight is very active, so that's why Nepo maneuvered the knight here to c4, attacks the d6 pawn, and now after castling we have knight to d6. Magnus lost the pawn here, but here he found great ways how to attack. F takes g3, we have f takes g3, and now he can also take out this pawn. The pawn on c2 is hanging, so here queen to c3, queen to b8, and now knight to f5. Nepo has now maneuvered the knight on a very active square. Again, I'm pointing out, when it comes to bishop's activity, I think still, although black hasn't developed the delightful bishop so far, this bishop can be improved maybe with moves as a5, then bishop to a6. On the other hand, I think this bishop on g2 is always a little bit stuck to the defense of the e4 pawn. Still, Magnus can search for knight to d4 outpost. Of course, first maybe kick away the knight. So as I said, Nepo found great ways how to activate the knight, but still this is playable, playable for black. In the game, Magnus tried rook to b5, protecting his pawn on e5. Then he wants to, of course, play much more freely with the queen. Knight to e7, the fork on the king and the bishop, but again, king to h2. You don't want again to take out this bishop. Will simply take. And now again, I think this knight will find great ways into the game. Knight to d4 would be an opportunity. So again, you're continuing the game with a bad bishop. Never ever, I think Nepo will take out this knight with this knight, the bishop of black. So here, after move king to h2, we have queen to c7, knight to f5, we have rook to c5, queen to d2, and now rook to d8. We have to compete now on the d file. That's the most active file now. Of course, the knight is protecting the rook. So here, Nepo goes queen to f2, we have rook to c3. Look how Magnus now activates this rook. There are now really some discovered tactics here around the square g3. That's actually what Magnus sensed here. He found great ways how to kick away the queen. Now in the game, Nepo tried a4. We have knight to d4, and now comes well, it was a mistake here by Nepo. Knight takes d4. What actually happened is here that Magnus can open here the long diagonal. As we said, he activated this rook, very nice, and here the g3 now is a weakness. After rook to d4, here queen to e2. If you take out now rook to d4, then you get e takes d4, and you see now you can maybe advance the pawn, queen to e5. You can maybe take out this pawn, but I think this pawn is much more important, and we would then here have a 2 versus 1 situation. So I think this would be completely winning endgame here for the world champion. So queen to e2 was played. Magnus plays bishop to e6, rook takes d4, again e takes d4, and now queen to h5. Attacking simply the king, but this check is actually not so dangerous. A better idea is simply to try to simplify the position, rook to f3, because Nepo probably thought that he could activate his rook with rook to f4, rook to h4, and deliver some checkmates. But actually it's not so dangerous because here Magnus should have proceeded simply with the move c5. Rook to f4 was on the board, and c5 is now already threatening something. If you try here the move rook to h4, you see still this g3 is hanging, so there's no way for white to activate this rook further. After the move c5, maybe a5 could happen, but now we can take out this pawn, and this is now a completely winning endgame. Actually, this continuation, it leads now into really some wild stuff, because rook to h4 would be the possibility, and actually what black needs to do now is to get out of the range of the rook. This is the suggested line by the engine. Rook to b5, king to b5, really wild, and now to take out the king. The king is actually perfectly fine here. The evaluation is -4 for black. Of course it's hard to see, but as I said, after remove rook to f4, Magnus plays queen to e7. He probably thought that he could have some troubles here. He had to defend this position. So here, after queen to e7, rook to h4, and now f6, Magnus creates some breathing spaces, and now e5, f takes e5, queen to e5, and now Magnus simply takes another pawn. We have rook to e4, and now a great move by the world champion, d3. He sacrifices the bishop because he actually needs, as I said, to win this game. He has now 2 connected pass pawns. This rook is deflected too much from the defense of these 2 pawns here. Nepo goes for it, queen to e6, rook to e6, and now d2 by Magnus. We have rook to d6, and now c5 is a mistake, and it leads now basically into a draw, because a better idea is simply to king to f7. You have to activate your king. The problem for Nepo is always this tactic. If you go somewhere with the bishop to protect it, then d1 comes actually with the discovered attack. That's the main issue. So it's not so easy for Nepo to include the king into the game. On the other hand, Magnus could play now very freely with his king, because also some ideas like bishop takes c6 cannot work, because we'll simply take, then the rook gets deflected, and we have the promotion. So it's simply a bad position for Nepo. As I said, king to f7 would be the best move, getting the king into the game, but here Magnus goes now c5. It was an inaccuracy, and now it gives Nepo time to activate the king. And now after move c3, here Nepo makes a huge blunder. He plays king to h4. Bishop to f3 finally would be the best move, because you found now at least some ways how to get with your king on the third rank. No discovered attacks are possible now. You're controlling the d1. The game leads now into, after king to f8, if you try to activate now the king, it's not such a bad position here for white, because here after rook to c1, bishop to b3, and now if you get attacked here, there is a way how to hold this position, how to never ever allow this pawns to get advanced. King to f6, and now king to f4, simply going into an opposition after rook to b1, bishop to c2, and we're simply playing bishop to d1. We're playing around these pawns, and I don't think that Magnus could win this game. But Nepo plays king to h4, as we said, bishop to f3, much better, and now king to f8, we have bishop to f3, and now Magnus has the opportunity to play rook to c1. What he wants to play is, of course, somehow get c2 and then d1. So far it's not possible, but we could attack here the bishop with the rook. Rook to f1 is also an opportunity here. Rook to d3, we have king to e7. You see now how Magnus march here. Rook to f1, again, if you take this will simply take, and then we have the promotion, so you cannot take the pawn on c3. It's now a winning endgame here for the world champion. Rook to e3, the king again gets towards the center, and now this idea, rook to f3, and here Magnus found a way how to promote the queen, and now g6 in this position. Nepo resigned. So really wild stuff. Magnus played here with the black pieces. Really risky game. He had to do it because he needs now also to win the last game in order to make it to the additional game. We'll see what will happen. This is not over, of course, for the world champion yet. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. Really beautiful chess that has been played now so far in this tournament. If you want to see more games from this tournament, check out my best chess games of this tournament so far. Here are some links, and you can also check out my commented chess games played by top engines, by Alpha Zero, Lila C0, Stockfish, and some more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.